I was stalking the front table at the bookstore when my past called and lit up my phone screen. Dad. The name looked wrong on the display, like it belonged to someone else's life. For a second, I honestly thought it was a spam call using his number by mistake. My father hadn't dialed my number in 3 years. Not for my birthdays, not when I moved into my own place, not when I texted him once, months ago, just to say I'd gotten promoted. But there it was, his name, ringing, insistent. I wiped my hands on my jeans, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. I could have let it go to voicemail. I should have. Instead, I swiped to answer and lifted the phone to my ear. Hello? There was a pause, just breathing, rough and unfamiliar. Then his voice, older and thinner than I remembered. Lena? Hearing him say my name like that, soft, almost unsure, knocked the air right out of me. Memories flashed, like someone flipping through an old photo album too fast. My mom's framed pictures all over the house, my dad's back turned to me at the kitchen sink, my cousin Jake laughing with him in the garage, while I stood in the doorway, invisible. It's been a while, he said. That's one way to put it, I replied, my voice coming out cooler than I felt. My fingers curled around the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask where I was working now, or if I was still taking night classes, or if I'd ever managed to crawl my way back toward the college degree his choices had ripped away from me. He got right to the point. I need your help, he said. I'm in some trouble, financial trouble. I was hoping you could lend me some money, just until things settle down. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it like it had betrayed me. My father, the man who refused to pay a single cent toward my tuition, who remortgaged his house to send my cousin Jake to a prestigious university, who made it very clear which of us was his real priority, was asking me for money. Kidding, right? I finally said, my throat tight. You're calling me about money? He cleared his throat. Lena, please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Things with Jake's business. They haven't gone the way we hoped. The debt is... Jake can't help you, I cut in. Your golden child? The one you invested everything in? The one you chose over your own daughter? Silence, heavy, crackling silence. In that tiny pause, something inside me shifted. For 28 years, I'd carried this gnawing, rotting feeling that I just wasn't enough. Never smart enough, pretty enough, athletic enough, Jake enough, for my father to choose me. I dropped out of the college I'd fought so hard to get into while he wrote checks for someone else's future. I worked night shifts and early shifts, burned myself out at jobs that barely covered rent because there wasn't enough for both of you. And now suddenly, I was his lifeline. Karma has a sick sense of humor, I whispered, more to myself than to him. What? He asked. Nothing, I said, straightening up, feeling the weight of every year of neglect settle into something sharper, clearer. You spent my whole life treating me like I was the mistake that took Mom away from you. You funded Jake's dreams and watched mine crumble. And now you want to talk about help? My dad started to say something, an apology, maybe, or an excuse. But I wasn't that desperate little girl anymore, begging him with straight A report cards and science fair trophies to just see me. That day, in the middle of a quiet bookstore, with my father drowning in the consequences of his own choices, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I had the power, and he knew it. You know how people always say karma will handle it, like it's some vague, comforting promise? I used to roll my eyes at that. But standing there with my phone warm against my ear and my father's shaky breathing on the other end of the line, I finally understood. Sometimes karma doesn't come crashing in like a car accident. Sometimes it walks in slowly, wearing a bookstore name tag, holding a mop in one hand and a stack of overdue bills in the other, and answers a call from the man who never believed in her. Me. If you'd ever walked into the house I grew up in, you would have thought my mother had just stepped out for a moment, maybe to grab something from the yard or answer a call in the hallway. Her shoes were still lined neatly beside the bedroom door. Her perfume bottles still sat on her vanity, half-used, labels fading. Her sweater still hung on the far left side of the closet, wrapped in that faint lavender scent I sometimes imagined was her way of lingering near me. But I never knew her. I only knew the absence she left behind. I'm 28 now, but for most of my life, Mother was a collection of stories told in hushed voices at family gatherings, stories about how she wanted a baby more than anything, how she'd cried tears of joy when she found out she was finally pregnant after years of fertility struggles. And every time an aunt leaned in to whisper, "She would have loved you so much, Lena," I felt it twist inside me, because the only person whose love I really needed made it clear he held me responsible for losing her. Dad never said the words directly. He never had to. His silence said it for him. He fed me, clothed me, sent me to school, but nothing about him felt like a father. He moved through parenthood the way someone completes physical therapy, slow, stiff, obligatory. He never hugged me. He never told me he loved me. On my birthdays, he'd place a wrapped box on the table without looking up from the bills he was organizing. When I brought home a certificate from school, he'd nod once and say, "Put it in the drawer." Approval was something I saw him give freely, to other people, just never to me. Then there was Jake, my cousin, my father's unspoken redemption project. When Jake's father, my uncle, died in a car accident, I was 8. The grief that hardened my father toward me seemed to soften him toward Jake. My cousin became a fixture in our house, his shoes by the door, his laughter echoing down the hall, his school papers stuck to our refrigerator as if they belonged there more than mine ever did. Jake was everything I wasn't. Athletic, extroverted, charming in a way that made adults melt. I was quieter, bookish, drawn to things like astronomy kits and writing prompts instead of football and backyard adventures. Dad adored Jake for the same traits he criticized in me. "Why can't you be more like him?" A sentence I heard so many times it stopped stinging, not because it hurt less, but because I went numb to survive. I tried, though. God, I tried. I joined the same sports teams even though I hated running. I forced myself into social events that made my stomach twist. I sat through Dad's car lectures pretending to care about things Jake found fascinating. But no matter what I did, I was always the shadow. Jake was the sun. The pattern followed us into high school. I worked my butt off for my grades. Late nights, color-coded notes, extra credit papers. And I excelled. Teachers pressed scholarships into my hands, told me I had a mind built for academia, for research, for writing. My English teacher once said she expected to see my name on a book cover one day. Dad barely reacted. Meanwhile, he celebrated Jake's C+ like it was the second coming. I still remember the day I overheard my father on the phone telling Jake he'd pay all of his college tuition. I was standing in the hallway with a folder full of my own acceptance letters I'd earned without a single ounce of help from him. When I asked if he could help me too, he didn't hesitate. "I can't afford to pay for both of you. Jake needs it more." That was the day something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, like a hairline fracture no one sees until one day the bone gives out entirely. From there, everything spiraled. Dropping out after one semester because I couldn't afford tuition on diner wages, working double shifts is just to stay afloat, watching Jake's social media filled with dorm parties, spring breaks, shiny new laptops my father paid for. I left home soon after, packed my life into 2 bags and walked away from everything I'd begged to belong to. Looking back now, I think that was the moment I stopped being a daughter and started being my own person. Looking back, the warning signs didn't arrive all at once. They came quietly, small, sharp moments that pricked at me long before everything finally shattered. At the time, I didn't call them red flags. I called them bad days, Dad being Dad, or maybe I'm just overthinking. But the truth is, the foundation of our relationship had been cracking for years. I just kept pretending it was normal. One of the earliest shifts happened when Jake started spending more time at our house. I was 8, naive enough to believe an extra kid meant someone to play with, someone to share secrets with under blankets, someone who'd understand me. Instead, I became the background noise in my own home. Dad would light up whenever Jake walked in, like someone had turned on a switch inside him that didn't exist for me. "Jake, buddy, how was practice?" "Jake, want to help me with the car?" "Jake, let's grab ice cream, my treat." Meanwhile, I'd hover on the edge of the room, holding a science kit or a book I wanted to show him, waiting for a moment that never came. By middle school, the differences became louder. Dad attended every single one of Jake's games, rain or shine. He shouted from the sidelines, his voice hoarse from cheering. I can still picture him, wrapped in a windbreaker, fist-pumping the air when Jake scored. But the night I won first place at the regional science fair, he didn't even look up from the TV long enough to acknowledge it. "Nice," he muttered, eyes glued to a football replay. Jake walked through the door 10 minutes later, and Dad greeted him like a returning hero. The resentment I felt back then was quiet, almost embarrassed. I kept wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Kids always assume it's their fault when adults withdraw from them. I was no different. In high school, things got even worse. Jake and I were in the same grade, which made comparisons unavoidable, but Dad leaned into them like it was a sport. Jake got invited to another leadership camp. Jake's coach says he has potential. Jake's teachers say he's such a joy to have in class. What my teachers said about me, about my writing, my awards, my talent, never seemed to matter. Dad's face never softened when it came to my achievements. His voice never lifted with pride. Everything I did felt like shouting into a void. The shift from emotional neglect to active disadvantage slipped in quietly too. It surfaced most clearly when college applications loomed. I still remember the night I overheard Dad talking on the phone with Jake, promising to cover his entire tuition, every cent. He spoke with such warmth, such conviction, like Jake's future was a sacred mission. My stomach dropped. My acceptance letters were still spread across the dining table, places I'd earned through sweat and grit. So I gathered my courage and asked him directly, "Dad, will you be helping me with college too?" He stared at me like I'd asked for something outrageous. "I can't pay for both of you, Lena. Jake needs it more." That sentence echoed in my skull for weeks. Jake needs it more. Jake needs it more. Jake needs it more. It wasn't the money that hurt the most. It was the message beneath it. You don't matter as much. You're not worth investing in. You are, and have always been, second place. That moment planted the seed of our final rupture. I didn't know it yet. I still clung to hope back then, but my relationship with my father was already dissolving, thread by fragile thread. And that seed, once planted, only grew, slowly, painfully, until it finally tore my entire world apart. The moment I realized I was nothing more than a placeholder in my own family came in the most ordinary way possible, over a phone call, during an ordinary dinner, while I sat in my tiny apartment with the hum of my refrigerator in the background. I had no idea that the life I had slowly built for myself, piece by piece, against all odds, was about to come crashing down with one call. It had been months since I cut ties with Dad, months since I'd left behind a house that once felt like a shrine to a woman I never knew, with a father who never looked at me the way I needed him to. I built a new life, hard, but mine, managing a bookstore, taking night classes, and finding comfort in friendships that didn't come with the weight of family expectations. I thought I had moved on, but when the phone rang that day, I didn't recognize the number. Something in my gut twisted, a low buzz of warning, but I ignored it. I was about to press ignore when I saw the name flashing on the screen. Dad. For the first time in 3 years. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. There was a strange panic bubbling inside me, an old instinct, one I didn't even realize I still had. The daughter in me wanted to believe it was an emergency, that maybe something had happened to him. Maybe he was calling because he missed me. Or maybe he was calling to apologize. But when I picked up the phone, I could already hear it in his voice, the discomfort, the forced pleasantries, the distance, the years of unresolved bitterness, regret, and unspoken words hanging like an invisible curtain between us. "Lena," he said, and I felt a strange knot twist in my chest. I need to talk." The words didn't come out right. He sounded different, aged, weaker. His voice, once so detached, now held a hint of desperation that I couldn't ignore. The space between us felt even wider than it had before. I braced myself. "What's this about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. But there was something thick in my throat. The years of silence suddenly felt heavy in the air. I need your help," he stammered. "I'm in some trouble, financial trouble. I don't know who else to turn to." My heart beat louder, almost painfully. I waited for him to explain, to say anything that would make sense of the words he'd just thrown out. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could possibly have the nerve to ask me for help after everything he'd done, after the way he abandoned me in favor of my cousin, after the way he chose him over me, time and time again. How could he ask me to bail him out now? But I didn't scream. I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. I know things haven't been right between us," he said, as if I didn't already know. "But I made mistakes, and now I'm in debt, a lot of debt. I've been trying to make it work, but I can't. And I thought maybe you could help me. It felt like my whole body froze. I couldn't even process the words. Help him? He was asking me for money? After everything he'd done to me? After years of neglect and comparing me to Jake like I wasn't even worth his time? I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, to remind him how many times I had needed him in my life, and he had just disappeared. But instead, I found myself asking, why me? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, his exhale ragged. Jake's not in a position to help right now, but I've always known you were capable. You've done well for yourself, right? I'm just asking for a little help. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process it fast enough. Jake, of course, was always the one who could do no wrong. Jake, who got the full ride to college. Jake, who had everything handed to him. Jake, who could now afford his fancy car, his nice clothes, his business ventures. But I was the one he came to for help, the one he'd always treated like a second-class citizen. And then the words spilled out of me, the words I didn't even know I needed to say. You've been telling me for years that Jake was better than me, that I wasn't enough, that I couldn't measure up, and now you're asking me for help? He didn't respond at first, and that silence, his inability to answer, said everything I needed to hear. I can't help you, I said, the finality of my words sounding louder than they felt in my head. Not after everything. You can't come to me now, not after all this time, expecting me to fix everything. There was a long, painful pause on the other end. His voice, when it came, was thin, almost trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you, Lena, he said. I didn't know how to. Goodbye, Dad. And I ended the call. I stared at the phone for a few seconds after I ended the call, as if waiting for something, maybe an apology to pop up in the form of a text, or a sudden shift in the atmosphere that would make everything feel normal again. But the silence was deafening. Nothing changed. The apartment I'd worked so hard to make my own suddenly felt cold, the hum of the refrigerator louder than usual, almost mocking me. I sat down at the small kitchen table, my fingers still gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. My mind raced, thoughts crashing over each other in a chaotic jumble. Part of me wanted to pick the phone back up, to call him back and somehow fix everything with a single conversation. After all, he was my father. Deep down, I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for us to repair the broken pieces. But then, just as quickly, another thought took root, a more bitter, freeing thought. This wasn't about fixing something broken. It was about finally standing up for myself. I had spent my entire life chasing after my father's approval, trying to be the person he would see as worthy of love, of his attention. I had done everything, good grades, sports, endless efforts to earn his affection. And for what? To be told, time and time again, that I wasn't enough. To be overshadowed by Jake, who could do no wrong, who could do the bare minimum and still receive all the love and support. I wanted to believe it wasn't personal, that maybe my dad didn't know how to grieve my mother, that maybe the bitterness he carried had clouded his judgment. But I had been the one who paid the price for that grief. I had been the one who learned early on that I wasn't the son he wanted, and now I was the one who had to live with the consequences of all those years of neglect. I took a deep breath, the kind that feels like it's coming from the very pit of your stomach, and tried to calm the shaking hands I hadn't even realized were trembling. My chest was tight, like I was suffocating under the weight of years of resentment and missed opportunities. But with each breath, I felt a little less like a victim, a little more like someone who had taken back control. I wasn't that little girl anymore, I told myself. I wasn't the one desperately trying to win his affection. I wasn't the one who needed his approval to feel like I was worth something. The Lena on the other end of that phone call wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't the daughter who couldn't measure up. She was someone who had built her life, piece by piece, on her own terms. And for the first time in years, I realized that if I didn't walk away from this toxic, suffocating cycle, I would never truly be free. But that didn't make the decision easy. I found myself pacing in the small space of my apartment, the weight of my father's absence pressing in on me. There were flashes of memories, moments where I needed him, where I needed his guidance or comfort, and he was nowhere to be found. I remembered when I got my first real heartbreak in high school, when Sarah had broken up with me for someone else. I'd come home, my eyes swollen from crying, and I had hoped, no, prayed, that he would be there, waiting to hold me, to give me the comfort that only a father could give. But when I walked through the door, he was in his usual spot on the couch, staring at the TV. He didn't even look up. I also remembered the day I got my driver's license. I was so proud of myself, so excited to be able to drive myself wherever I wanted, but I wasn't able to share that moment with him. I had to beg the neighbor down the street to teach me. And when I came home that day, holding my license in my hand, he barely acknowledged it. He was too busy talking to Jake, as usual. It wasn't just the big moments, it was the little ones. The moments that were supposed to be simple, but instead felt like the deepest cuts. And yet, even with all that history, part of me still wanted to believe that he could change. That somehow, the man who had been absent for so much of my life could suddenly wake up and realize what he had done. But I was done. It was too late for me to keep hoping for something that wasn't going to come. I had spent too long trying to get him to see me. I had wasted too much time trying to convince myself that the relationship I wanted was possible. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the call. It wasn't even the years of neglect. It was realizing that no matter how badly I wanted it, no matter how much I craved the kind of love he had for Jake, it wasn't something I could force. It was never going to happen. And it wasn't my fault. It was his fault. I stared at the phone again, half expecting it to ring, for him to call back, to apologize, to beg for my forgiveness. But I knew deep down that the apology wouldn't come, not in the way I needed it to. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay, because for the first time in my life, I had learned something incredibly important. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need him to fix anything. I had already fixed myself. If the first phone call from my father shook me, what happened in the days that followed cracked something even deeper. At first, I thought the conversation was over, that I could close that chapter and return to the quiet, stable life I'd worked so hard to build. But life has a way of dragging you back into the places you swore you'd never revisit. For me, that place was my family. Within a week, I started getting messages from numbers I didn't recognize. A few were from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, names I'd seen tagged in old family photos, but had never had a real relationship with. The messages came one after another. Your dad said he tried calling you. You should really hear him out, Lena. Family sticks together. Ignoring him won't solve anything. We heard you refused to help. Is that true? It was surreal. I hadn't heard from these people when I dropped out of college. I hadn't heard from them when I packed my bags and left home. I hadn't heard from them when I struggled through nights working double shifts just to make rent. But suddenly, when my father needed money, my entire extended family remembered I existed. For a moment, I considered ignoring them all, blocking every number, deleting every message. But one text made me stop cold. It was from Jake's mother, my aunt. Can we talk, please? My chest tightened. She'd always been kind in a distant way, never cruel, but never maternal toward me either. She'd adored Jake, naturally. He was her son, but she'd never stepped in during all the years my father built Jake into a pedestal and left me standing beneath it. I hesitated for an hour before replying with a simple, "What is it?" The phone rang almost immediately. Lena? Her voice was soft, cautious. Yes, I'm here. I heard things aren't good between you and your father, she said. He's been struggling. He told me he reached out, and you... She trailed off delicately, choosing her words. You declined. I exhaled sharply. I didn't decline. I just told him the truth. I can't help him financially. Silence, then a sigh. He's made mistakes, she said, but he's still your father. There it was, that old familiar phrase. He's still your father. As if biology alone meant love, as if his title excused every wound. Where was that energy when I needed him? I asked before I could stop myself. When I needed school supplies? When I needed someone at my science fair? When I needed tuition support? When I needed a father who chose me? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, You know he's been helping Jake for years. He feels responsible for him. I know, I replied bitterly. He paid for Jake's entire life. College, car, down payment on a house, the business venture. She went silent again. And in that silence, I heard everything she wasn't saying. The rumors I'd heard were true. My father had poured every resource, every dollar, every ounce of hope into Jake. And now? Now he had nothing left. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked slightly. Lena, your father took out loans for Jake. He remortgaged the house, maximized his credit cards. He thought Jake's business would take off. And did it? Another long pause. No, she whispered. The truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. Jake, the golden boy, the chosen one, the child Dad built his entire life around, had failed him, and Jake wasn't stepping up to help him now. It was twisted, but for the first time, my father was feeling what I had felt my entire life, abandonment. I didn't feel satisfaction, just exhaustion. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I truly am, but I can't be responsible for fixing his choices. Before she could respond, a shout erupted in the background. A man's voice. Angry, strained. Jake. Are you talking to her? Give me the phone, Mom. My aunt whispered, Jake, stop, please, just go to your room. The sound of something clattering filled the line, and then Jake's voice blasted through the speaker. Lena? Seriously? You think you're better than us now? I closed my eyes. Jake, I don't want to argue. Oh, but you do, he snapped. You always have. You've always been jealous. I let out a humorless laugh. Jealous? Of what? Dad's favoritism? Watching him throw money at you while telling me I wasn't worth the investment? He didn't like that. I could hear it in his sharp inhale. You owe him, Jake said. After everything he sacrificed? Sacrificed? I repeated, my voice trembling. He didn't sacrifice for me. He sacrificed me. Silence. Then Jake's voice, cold as steel. If you don't help him, it's on you when he loses the house. My heart lurched. Images of my mother's preserved room flashed through my mind. The untouched sweaters, the fading perfume bottles, the ghost of a woman I never knew lingering in every corner of that house. But that house wasn't my home. Not anymore. Not for a long time. My father's decisions put him in debt, I said firmly, and I'm sorry he's struggling. But I won't let you guilt me into taking responsibility for choices I never had a say in. Jake exhaled sharply, frustrated. Whatever. You've always been selfish. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. That night, lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, everything weighed on me. The past, the present, the family, the expectations, the guilt. The loneliness was suffocating. But beneath the pain, something else began to form. Resolve. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. A storm was coming, one built from years of resentment, exhaustion, and truths long buried. And for the first time, I wasn't the girl trying to hold everything together. I was the woman preparing to face everything head on. I wish I could say that after hanging up on Jake, I felt empowered, like the heroine in a movie who finally stands up for herself and walks away victorious. But real life is never that clean. The apartment felt unbearably silent after that call, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe you, it swallows you. It presses against your ribs and sinks its claws into your breathing. I sat there on the edge of my bed, my phone still in my hand, feeling like I had just set something on fire and wasn't sure if I'd burned the right thing. I'd told myself for years that I didn't need my family, that I was better off without them. But hearing their voices again, my aunt pleading, Jake attacking, my father's weary desperation echoing from earlier, brought back something I thought I'd buried a long time ago. The little girl who spent her whole life trying to be good enough. And for the first time in years, she felt utterly, painfully alone. I lay back on my pillow and stared at the ceiling, letting the memories wash over me like waves I couldn't stop. The times I'd walked into the living room and found my dad teaching Jake how to swing a baseball bat. The way he used to ruffle Jake's hair and say, "Attaboy," a phrase I never once heard directed at me. The day I graduated high school and looked out into the crowd, searching desperately for a face that wasn't there. I remembered the night I packed my bags and left home. My father didn't stop me. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't ask if I had enough money. He just watched me carry my life down the stairs and onto the bus like I was a guest leaving early. And here I was, years later, curled up in a bed I earned myself, still feeling the sting of not being chosen. I rolled over and grabbed my blanket, pulling it to my chin as if it could shield me from the heaviness creeping up my spine. The emotional fog was thick, thicker than anything I'd let myself feel in a long time. Was I wrong? The question whispered itself into the darkness. Was I wrong to hang up on him? Was I wrong to refuse the man who gave me life, even if he never acted like it meant anything? What if he really was losing the house? What if he was truly that desperate? My stomach twisted, my chest hurt. Guilt has a way of sinking its teeth into you when you're weakest. I got up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, took one sip, then set it down without drinking more. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. My reflection in the kitchen window looked foreign. Eyes red, shoulders slumped, hair messy. I hated how familiar that girl looked. I'd seen her before, in mirrors, growing up. After fights, after disappointments, after hearing Jake get praised for something while I stood in the doorway with hope dying inside me. I thought I'd outgrown her, but grief has a way of resurrecting the versions of yourself you swore you'd buried. I sat on the floor, back against the refrigerator, pulling my knees to my chest, the cold tiles pressed against my legs, grounding me just enough to breathe. For a long moment, I let myself feel everything I'd been trying to ignore. The heartbreak of knowing my father never really saw me. The ache of realizing he still didn't. Not even now, when he needed help. The fear that no matter how much I grew, I'd always carry the child inside me who just wanted to be loved. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. Silent at first, then heavier, shaking my shoulders. I pressed my palms to my eyes, ashamed of how quickly the dam had broken. I cried for the life I didn't get, for the childhood I deserved, for the milestone moments my father missed, for the love that should have been unconditional but never was, for all the years I told myself I was fine when I wasn't. And in that moment, sitting alone in a dimly lit kitchen with my back pressed against the refrigerator and my future uncertain, I reached the lowest point of all of this. The darkest moment wasn't the call from my father. It wasn't Jake's voice dripping with entitlement. It wasn't the family whispering behind my back. It was the realization that I had spent so much of my life trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Love, belonging, recognition, a place in my own family. I curled tighter, my breath uneven. My entire body felt heavy, as if the weight of years of emotional neglect had finally crashed down all at once. I whispered into the quiet, "I deserve better." And for the first time, I believed it. But belief isn't strength, not yet. Belief is a spark in the dark. Strength is what comes after. And soon, it would. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany or a single sentence that snapped everything into place. It began quietly, like a thin, stubborn thread pulling tight across my chest, urging me to finally stop drowning in feelings that weren't mine to carry. The morning after my breakdown, I woke up with swollen eyes and a headache that pulsed behind my temples. I dragged myself to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection under the harsh fluorescent light. I looked tired, not physically, emotionally. Tired in a way I'd learned to hide for years. And suddenly I felt something different. Not anger, not guilt, not grief. Clarity. I'd spent the night mourning the family I'd never had. But now, standing there, with water dripping down my chin, I realized something shocking in its simplicity. I wasn't the one who had failed. He had. My father had failed me, over and over again. And I had spent my whole life paying the bill for his emotional bankruptcy. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it shifted the weight. It placed responsibility where it belonged. I dried my face and reached for my phone with steadier hands. Not to call him, not to apologize, but to understand. If my father wanted to drag me back into the mess he created, then I needed to know exactly what kind of mess it was. So I started making calls. Not to family, they'd already chosen their side, but to the people who'd known us from the outside, people who didn't have the same emotional blind spots. My first call was to Mrs. Peterson, my mom's best friend. She answered immediately. "Lena, oh sweetheart, it's been so long." Her warmth cracked something in me, but in a gentler way. She always spoke about my mother with tenderness, not pity. And when I told her what my father had asked for, she didn't pressure me or guilt me. Instead, she exhaled sharply. "I was afraid of this," she said. "He's been making reckless choices for years." "Because of Jake?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause. I could almost hear her choosing her words. "Honey, your father thought he could build the life he wanted through Jake. That if he poured enough into him, he'd finally feel like the father he wasn't ready to be when you came along." It stung, but it was the first honest explanation I'd ever heard. I hesitated. "Do you know how bad it is? The debt?" "Bad," she admitted softly. "He put everything into Jake's business, took out loans, maxed credit cards, remortgaged the house, and when the venture collapsed, he couldn't keep up." I closed my eyes. The house, Mom's shrine, the one part of my childhood I hadn't completely resented. "Jake isn't helping him?" I whispered. Mrs. Peterson laughed bitterly. "Jake is drowning himself. He never learned restraint because everything was handed to him. Your father created the perfect storm." Her words hit hard. Dad had spent his entire life trying to mold Jake into something he never required of me. And now, Jake couldn't carry the weight he'd been given. The son who got everything had nothing to give back. After I hung up, I called Mr. Johnson, the neighbor who once taught me how to drive. He filled in the gaps with the bluntness only old men possess. "Your dad yelled at Jake in the driveway a few weeks ago," he said. "Jake showed up in some fancy new car and your father nearly fell apart. Said he was drowning in debt while Jake was buying toys." I swallowed hard. So the house wasn't the only thing falling apart. Their relationship was too. Mr. Johnson lowered his voice. Lena, your dad created this mess. You didn't. And if he's reaching out to you now, it's because he's run out of places to hide. For a long moment, I said nothing, because for the first time in my life, someone was saying out loud what I always suspected. And then came the text. A long message from my father, full of regret, full of apologies, full of explanations for years of silence, distance, and choices that broke me. He wrote about Mom, about the day she died, about how he'd blamed himself and me, because grief needs a target, and I was the only one left. He wrote about Jake, how taking care of him made my father feel useful when he couldn't bear to face the daughter who looked too much like the wife he lost. He wrote that he was proud of me, that Mom would have been proud of me, that he was sorry, truly sorry, for every moment he chose someone else over me. I sat on my bed reading the message twice, then a third time, and I felt nothing like what I expected. Not anger, not relief, not forgiveness. Just truth. Raw, heavy, unmistakable. I typed slowly, carefully. I hear you. I'm glad you're finally being honest, but I'm not ready to meet. I need more time. Your choices led you here, and I won't fix them for you. Then I hit send, and something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to him. I was choosing myself. When I hit send, something uncoiled inside me. A tightness I'd carried my entire life loosened, like a knot that had finally given up after years of being pulled in every direction. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't even feel relieved. I felt steady, but the fallout, that came fast. 1. The family turns on each other. 2 days after I replied to my father, my phone started lighting up again, not with guilt-tripping messages toward me this time, but with updates from the same relatives who had tried to pressure me. Except now they weren't pressuring me at all. They were unraveling. One text read, "Your father and Jake had a huge fight. Neighbors heard everything." Another text came minutes later. "Jake hasn't spoken to him since. Things are bad, Lena." A third message, this one from an uncle I barely remembered. "Your dad told everyone the truth about the debt. People are shocked. No one knew he'd given Jake that much money." I sat on my couch, phone buzzing in my lap, watching the family I once longed to be part of split down the middle, fractures forming in places I had once believed were solid. But what amazed me most wasn't their conflict. It was how calm I felt, how far away it all seemed. For once, the storm wasn't dragging me under. It was passing around me, no longer mine to endure. 2. Jake's golden boy image cracks. The real shock came when Mr. Johnson called again, not because he owed me anything, but because he'd always been decent, grounding in ways my own father never had been. "Lena," he said, "I thought you'd want to know. Jake came by the house again." I leaned forward. "And?" He was shouting, real shouting. Said he couldn't believe your father told the family everything. Said he'd pay him back when the business took off. Mr. Johnson paused. "Lena, that business is gone. It's over. Everyone knows it." I closed my eyes. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, just clarity. Jake had spent years being propped up by my father, praised for bare minimum effort, protected from consequences. But now consequences had found him. And unlike me, who'd been forced to grow up by necessity at 18, Jake had none of the resilience required to handle failure. He had the money, the car, the opportunities, but not the backbone. And weirdly, I didn't hate him for it. He was simply the product of the environment my father created. 3. My father faces his life without illusions. A week later, I received a final text from Dad. Not a plea, not a demand, not an apology. Just a single sentence. "I understand." 2 words, but they hit harder than anything else he'd ever said to me. I didn't know if "I understand" meant he finally saw the years he had thrown away, or if he understood he was now alone, emotionally, financially, and socially. Relatives who once praised him for being so generous with Jake now whispered behind his back. Some quietly blamed him for enabling Jake. Others blamed Jake for draining him dry. But not one of them blamed me. For the first time, the family narrative wasn't twisted against me. Dad's choices, his favoritism, his neglect, his financial gamble were exposed under real scrutiny. And all I had done was tell the truth. 4. The house isn't mine to save. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Peterson called. "Honey," she said gently, "your father may lose the house." The house. The place where my mother's presence lingered like a ghost, where I had spent years walking on eggshells, where photos of my mother hung like reminders of everything I never got to have. A younger version of me would have panicked, would have thought, if I don't help, I'm letting Mom down, would have felt responsible for preserving something sacred. But the woman I had become knew a truth younger me couldn't grasp. A house full of ghosts is not a home. And it wasn't my job to save it, or him. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "but I can't fix this for him." Mrs. Peterson didn't argue. She just exhaled softly, full of the understanding my own father had never given me. 5. I choose a different path. Around this time, my friends noticed a shift in me. Not a dramatic one, but a settling, a grounding. One night at our weekly get-together, my friend Sarah, not the high school Sarah, looked at me over a slice of pizza and said, "You seem lighter, like something clicked." I smiled. "Maybe it did. I'm proud of you," she said, nudging my shoulder. And that simple sentence, so easy for her to say, hit me in a way my father's words never could. Because this pride wasn't tied to obligation or comparison or disappointment. It wasn't conditional. It wasn't rationed. It was freely given. And it reminded me that family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from the people who show up, the people who choose you, the people who stay. 6. The fallout belongs to them, not me. In the end, the consequences landed exactly where they belonged, on the man who made the choices, and the cousin who benefited from them. My father's financial collapse, Jake's professional failure, the relatives' shifting loyalties, the loss of the house, the unraveling, none of it belonged to me. For the first time in my life, the chaos wasn't my burden. It was simply theirs. And I walked forward without looking back. Life didn't magically transform after everything fell apart. The bookstore still opened at 9 a.m. I still took my night classes. The city still hummed outside my window every evening as I brewed cheap tea and read dog-eared novels. But something inside me was different. Not louder, not bolder, just steadier. For the first time in my life, my worth wasn't something I was trying to earn. It simply was. When my father's situation worsened, when the house went on the market, when Jake disappeared from social media, when relatives whispered about whose fault it all was, I watched from a distance without feeling the old ache of responsibility. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them well or wish them harm. I simply released them. One evening, after a long shift at the bookstore, I walked home beneath soft streetlights, a breeze tugging at my jacket. My backpack felt heavy with textbooks, but my chest felt light in a way it never had before. I stopped at a bench near the small park by my street and just breathed. The version of me who once begged for scraps of affection never would have believed this feeling was possible, this quiet, this peace. My phone vibrated, and when I pulled it out, I saw a message from my father. His name still saved the same way it had always been. Just one sentence. "Thank you for being honest with me." Not a plea, not a demand. Just acknowledgement. I didn't reply, but for the first time, it didn't hurt not to. I sat there for a few minutes watching people walk by, couples holding hands, kids running ahead of tired parents, friends laughing as they tried to balance takeout containers on handlebars. Life kept going, and so did I. I wasn't defined by the love I didn't receive. I wasn't shaped by the person who couldn't show up for me. I wasn't the echo of my mother's death or the absence of my father's affection. I was Lena. 28 years old, a woman who survived grief she never asked for, a woman who built her life from the ground up, a woman learning, slowly but surely, to choose herself. And if there's a lesson in all of this, for anyone watching my story unfold, it's this. Sometimes the family you're born into fails you. Sometimes the love you deserve never arrives. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who break you instead. But none of that defines you. What defines you is who you become after the breaking, what you choose, who you let in, and how you learn to love yourself the way others never learned to love you. My story isn't tied to the past anymore. It's tied to the future I'm building, slow, imperfect, but mine. And for the first time in my life, that's enough.